The night was heavy with silence in Ouagadougou. Inside the presidential palace, President Ibrahim Traoré stood before a long table covered with reports, maps, and satellite photos of the mining regions. Across from him sat his ministers, tense and quiet. News had just arrived from London. Billionaire financier Scott Bessent had made a statement that spread across every Western news channel. Africa's gold belongs to the free markets, and we intend to take it. The words echoed like a declaration of war. Traoré, dressed in his military uniform, slowly looked up. "Take it," he repeated, voice low but sharp. "They think Africa is still a warehouse they can walk into." Minister Kabore shifted uneasily. "Sir, they've already started applying pressure. French and American investors are freezing aid, and Bessent's fund is buying shares in African mines." Traoré leaned back in his chair, his gaze hard as steel. "Let them buy paper. The ground answers to no man's pen." Outside, thunder rolled across the horizon. Burkina Faso's dry season storms had arrived, sudden, violent, and short. Inside the palace, the same kind of storm was brewing. Traoré turned toward his security chief, Ouedraogo. "What about our gold convoys? The exports?" "Secure for now," Ouedraogo replied. "But there are rumors of foreign agents trying to infiltrate the routes. Satellite interference, drone flights, they're mapping our reserves." Traoré's lips tightened. He remembered what his father used to say, "The colonizer never leaves, he only changes uniform." Now they came not with guns, but with algorithms, contracts, and bankers like Bessent. "Summon the governors of the mining provinces," he said, "and prepare a message. If they want Africa's gold, they'll have to see who bleeds first." That night, the lights of the palace stayed on until dawn. Across the ocean, in New York, Scott Bessent sat in his glass tower office, sipping wine, smiling at the breaking headlines. "The boy soldier wants to play statesman," he murmured. "Let's see how long he lasts without our banks." He had underestimated one thing: Traoré wasn't playing. He was preparing. By morning, the air in Ouagadougou was already buzzing with tension. Traoré stood on the balcony of the presidential palace, watching convoys of military trucks rolling toward the north. Each vehicle carried sealed crates of raw gold, Burkina Faso's lifeblood, now being moved to secure underground vaults. Down below, the people were restless but proud. They had heard the Western threats. They knew what Scott Bessent had said on live television: Burkina Faso's resources are too important to be left to chaos. If the government won't cooperate, we'll intervene economically, or otherwise. In the markets, in the mosques, in the schools, everyone whispered the same question: would the West invade again, this time with bankers instead of soldiers? Inside the strategy room, Traoré pointed to a large digital map glowing red and gold. "These mines," he said, "represent more than wealth. They are dignity. Without them, our people starve. With them, we decide our destiny." Economy Minister Diop frowned. "But, Mr. President, if Bessent manipulates the international gold prices?" Traoré cut him off. "Let him. When they gamble with fake numbers, we'll deal in real metal. Our gold doesn't need their approval." Ouedraogo, the security chief, leaned in. "We've intercepted encrypted messages between Bessent's firm and the French intelligence network. They're not just speculating, sir. They're planning something physical." "What kind of something?" "Sabotage, maybe theft. They've hired private contractors, mercenaries disguised as logistics experts." Traoré's face darkened. "Then they will meet soldiers, not clerks." He walked to the window, where sunlight glinted off the distant hills. "For centuries, they took from Africa and called it trade. Now we stand to take back what's ours, and they call it theft." He turned to his ministers. "I want every foreign-owned mining site under surveillance. Every cargo plane checked. Every Western advisor questioned. If anyone thinks they can take from us again." He paused, the fire in his eyes unblinking. "They'll take something else instead." Across the ocean, Bessent received a new report, a message from one of his consultants inside West Africa. It read: "Burkina Faso has mobilized troops. Traoré is defiant. He's turning your statement into a war cry. Bessent smirked, tapping his gold pen on the table. Then we'll see if his courage can outlast my capital. That same night, while most of Ouagadougou slept, the capital's power grid flickered and failed. Darkness swallowed the city for exactly 40 minutes. When the lights came back, a convoy carrying newly refined gold had vanished on its way to the national treasury. By dawn, Traoré was already in the crisis room, eyes blazing under the cold fluorescent light. Who knew the route? He demanded. Ouedraogo placed a file on the table. Only 6 people, sir. All cleared through security. But there's something else. The GPS trackers on the convoy were jammed by a satellite system registered to a company in the Cayman Islands. That company is owned by Bessent's fund. Traoré exhaled slowly, the veins on his temple tightening. So, this is not theft, he said. It's war. His voice was calm, but the ministers could feel the storm building behind it. He thinks gold is power, Traoré continued, but gold only obeys those who can protect it. If the West wants to play thieves, we will remind them, Africa invented the shield before they invented the gun. He turned to Ouedraogo. Find the convoy. I don't care if it's in Mali, Ghana, or at the bottom of the desert. And send a message to every African leader we still trust, Burkina Faso's sovereignty is under attack. An hour later, messages began flashing across encrypted military channels. From Bamako, from Niamey, from Conakry, allies replied. We stand with you, brother. Send coordinates. Africa is one front. Meanwhile, in London, Scott Bessent was hosting a private dinner at a luxurious Mayfair club. Around the table sat oil executives, former intelligence officers, and political lobbyists. One of them whispered, "Your move has shaken the markets. Gold prices are up 3% already." Bessent smiled faintly. It's not about price. It's about control. Once we control the flow, Africa will bend. And that boy, that soldier president, he swirled his wine, he'll realize that defiance is expensive. Across the table, an ex-CIA operative smirked. And if he doesn't? Bessent's smile widened. Then maybe he'll learn what happens when money bleeds slower than men. Back in Ouagadougou, Traoré was on the move. He boarded a military chopper bound for the north. Below, the scorched savanna stretched endlessly, his land, his people, his fight. He whispered to himself, almost like a vow. If they want Africa's gold, they'll dig their graves next to it. The helicopter roared across the barren plains, slicing through the golden dawn. Inside, Traoré sat between 2 armed officers, reviewing reconnaissance photos. Each image told the same story. Foreign drones over mining zones, unidentified vehicles near the borders, and coded transmissions in French and English frequencies. They think Africa doesn't listen, he said quietly, eyes fixed on the photos. But we hear every whisper now. The pilot's voice cracked through the radio, Mr. President, we're approaching the Gorcy checkpoint. On the ground, soldiers saluted as Traoré stepped out, his boots hitting the dust with purpose. The air smelled of iron and diesel. The local commander ran up. Mr. President, we found the missing convoy. Traoré's jaw tightened. Show me. A mile away, half buried in sand, the trucks lay stripped and burned. Their cargo, gone. Only the metal crates remained, opened and empty. The commander handed him a scorched satellite tag. This was found under the lead vehicle. It's military grade, not ours. Ouedraogo knelt beside the wreckage, scanning the tag with a device. The signal data flashed on the screen, coordinates traced to the Atlantic coast, a private airstrip in Sierra Leone. That's where they loaded the gold, said Traoré. And from there, straight to Europe. Ouedraogo nodded grimly. We can intercept the shipment before it leaves African airspace. But it would mean breaching international air protocols. If we fail, it could cause a diplomatic crisis. Traoré stared at the horizon, the rising sun painting the sand blood red. They declared war without firing a bullet, he said. Let the world call it what it wants. We call it justice. He turned to his communications officer. Patch me through to the air base at Bobo Dioulasso. Code Black Lion. Minutes later, fighter jets thundered across the sky. Burkina Faso's air force, small but loyal, took flight. In control towers, Western pilots watching radar screens froze in disbelief. No one had expected Traoré to move this fast. In London, alarms went off in Bessent's office. "What the hell is he doing?" shouted an aide. Bessent read the report with disbelief. "He's sending jets," he muttered, "to intercept his own gold?" Another aide whispered nervously, "If they down a European cargo plane, this could turn global." Bessent smirked coldly. "Good, then everyone will finally know how far the boy will go to keep his toys." Back in the cockpit, the lead Burkinabe pilot received final orders. Traoré's voice crackled through the radio. "Whatever flies with stolen gold, bring it down." And Africa held its breath. Far above the West African coast, the sound of jet engines tore through the sky. Two Burkinabe Mirage fighters raced over the clouds, their sensors locked onto a single aircraft, a large, unmarked cargo plane climbing fast toward international airspace. "Target acquired," said the pilot. "No transponder signal. No flight clearance." "Orders, command." Traoré's voice came through the encrypted channel, calm but cold. "You have your orders. That gold belongs to our people. No one leaves this continent with our future." The pilot hesitated for a moment, just a heartbeat, then switched to combat mode. "Copy that." Down below, in the presidential war room, the screens glowed red with live radar. Every minister watched in silence. Traoré stood in the center, hands behind his back, eyes fixed on the digital map. The tension was thick enough to choke on. Ouedraogo leaned closer. "If we shoot that plane down, the West will call it aggression." Traoré didn't flinch. "And when they steal from us, what do they call it? Business?" At 20,000 feet, the fighters drew closer. The stolen cargo plane began broadcasting a fake distress call. "Mayday, Mayday. Civilian aircraft, engine malfunction." The Burkinabe pilot frowned. "That's no civilian code, it's military encryption." "Confirmed," said the radar operator. "This isn't a commercial plane, it's armed." "Permission to engage?" "Engage," said Traoré. Two missiles streaked through the sky, trailing fire. The explosion lit the clouds like sunrise. Fragments of metal and smoke fell into the Atlantic. In London, the alert hit Bessent's office like a thunderclap. His aide burst in, panicking. "Sir, we've lost the shipment. The plane's been destroyed." Bessent rose from his chair, face pale with fury. He actually did it. He attacked a Western asset. He slammed his fist on the table. He's just declared economic war. Across Africa, however, the news spread like wildfire. Crowds filled the streets of Ouagadougou, waving flags, chanting Traoré's name. "Africa will not be robbed again," they shouted. In neighboring capitals, Bamako, Niamey, Conakry, leaders sent messages of support. For the first time, the continent seemed united, not by fear, but by defiance. At the same hour, Traoré addressed his nation on live television. His uniform still bore the dust of the airfield. "They thought we would kneel," he said. "They thought we would trade our honor for coins. But Africa bows to no banker. Let this be the last time anyone mistakes our patience for weakness." The world was listening, and trembling. The broadcast went viral within hours. Across social media, clips of Traoré's fiery declaration flooded timelines. "Africa bows to no banker" became a rallying cry. In the streets, murals of him appeared overnight, one hand holding the Burkinabe flag, the other crushing a golden coin. But in Western capitals, fury brewed. Bessent was summoned to an emergency meeting in Washington with political and financial leaders. The room was filled with sharp suits and sharper tempers. "You let him humiliate the system," one senator snapped. "He just downed a private asset. If we don't respond, others will follow his lead." Bessent adjusted his tie, voice calm but venomous. "Gentlemen, I didn't lose control. I gave him the illusion of victory. And illusions fade." "What do you mean?" He opened a folder showing graphs, maps, and economic reports. "Burkina Faso may have its gold, but the global market belongs to us. We'll starve his economy, crash his currency, and make his people beg for bread before the year ends." In Ouagadougou, Traoré was already anticipating the storm. His advisors warned him that Western banks had frozen international transactions and suspended trade deals. "They want to suffocate us economically," Diop said gravely. Traoré nodded. "Then we'll breathe African air." He announced the creation of a new regional trade pact, the Sahel Economic Alliance, linking Burkina Faso with Mali, Niger, and Guinea in gold-backed commerce. "If they close their banks, we'll open our own vaults," he said. When the news broke, Western analysts mocked the move, calling it symbolic nationalism. But within weeks, African currencies began stabilizing. Gold reserves were pooled. Trade routes reopened under joint military protection. Bessent watched the numbers rise, disbelief creeping into his eyes. "Impossible," he muttered. "He's turning defiance into economics." And far away in Ouagadougou, Traoré smiled at the reports. "They wanted to starve us," he said softly, "but they forgot, Africa has been hungry before. And we learned how to feed ourselves." Weeks turned into months, and the tides of power began to shift. What started as a crisis became a movement. Across Africa, leaders who once bowed to foreign investors now spoke with renewed pride. The Sahel Economic Alliance was no longer just an experiment, it was a rebellion wrapped in economics. In Bamako, a radio host declared, for the first time, "Gold speaks Bambara, not English." In Niamey, crowds marched under banners that read, "Africa is not a mine, it is a mother." Traoré watched the footage in silence, pride and caution flickering in his eyes. "They've awakened," he said to Ouedraogo. "Now we must protect that awakening." But danger was never far. Intelligence reports warned of new plots, cyber attacks, infiltration, bribes aimed at dividing the alliance. Western media began a coordinated smear campaign. "Traoré's gold dream will collapse," read one headline. Another called him the dictator in camouflage. When his advisors showed him the reports, Traoré laughed softly. "When you hit the empire where it hurts, they start calling you names." Meanwhile, Scott Bessent was fighting to save his reputation. Investors were pulling out of his fund after losses tied to Africa's sudden resilience. "The markets are spooked," his assistant said nervously. "They think Traoré's model could spread." "Then we burn the model," Bessent snapped. "If we can't buy Africa, we'll bankrupt it." He ordered a campaign of economic sabotage, spreading false data, hacking into trade networks, and using shell companies to manipulate gold prices. But Traoré was ready. With the help of African cyber engineers, many of them self-taught youths, Burkina Faso's digital defense struck back. When Bessent's firms tried to crash their markets, the attempt failed spectacularly. On live TV, Traoré announced, "They attack with lies, but we defend with truth. They hide behind data, but we stand with the people." The crowd roared. The world was watching. And somewhere in his London tower, Bessent finally realized, he wasn't fighting a soldier anymore. He was fighting a symbol. The momentum was unstoppable. From Ghana to Chad, nations began opening talks to join the Sahel Alliance. Even distant countries like Tanzania and Ethiopia sent delegations to Ouagadougou, eager to learn how Traoré had turned defiance into strength. In one meeting, a South African delegate said, "You've done what our leaders only dreamed of, you turned gold into a weapon." Traoré smiled faintly. "Not a weapon," he corrected. "A mirror. It shows who we truly are when no one else defines us." Meanwhile, in Europe, panic was spreading. Western investors were demanding answers from their governments. The African bloc's control over gold exports had begun to affect global supply chains, causing price surges in London and New York. The same markets that had laughed at Traoré's alliance were now bleeding billions. Bessent stood before a room of angry financiers. "You promised control," one shouted. "You've created a rebellion." Bessent's calm facade cracked. "Control is temporary," he said. But fear can still bring them down. That evening, Western media launched a new wave of disinformation, forged documents claiming corruption in the Sahel alliance, deepfakes of Traoré meeting arms dealers, and reports of civil unrest that didn't exist. When the lies spread online, Traoré didn't flinch. He gathered journalists at the palace. "If they accuse us of chaos," he said, "let them come and film the peace we built. If they call us corrupt, let them explain how they lost their gold to a poor soldier from Africa." Outside the palace, thousands of citizens chanted his name. Mothers held babies draped in the national flag. Students carried signs that read, "You can't colonize truth." For the first time in modern history, Africa was dictating the narrative, not as a victim, but as the voice of defiance. And yet, in the shadows of London's skyline, Bessent whispered to his aides, "Symbols are fragile. All it takes is one bullet." The threat came sooner than anyone expected. Late one night in Ouagadougou, the presidential convoy was ambushed on its way back from a rural development project. Explosions tore through the dark, lighting up the desert road. Traoré's security forces reacted instantly, gunfire echoed, smoke filled the air, and the sound of helicopters thundered above. Within minutes, the attackers were neutralized. But the message was clear: this wasn't a robbery. It was an assassination attempt. In the security headquarters, General Ouedraogo placed the recovered evidence on the table: Western-made weapons, encrypted radios, and a satellite tracker registered to a European private military company. Traoré looked at the weapons silently. His expression didn't change, but the room felt colder. "They failed with lies," he said quietly. "Now they try bullets." Marie, his chief advisor, spoke up. "Sir, we can't prove who ordered this." "I don't need proof," he interrupted. "I just need to make sure they never try again." The next morning, he addressed the nation live on television. His uniform was dusty, his tone calm but unyielding. "They think fear will make us bend," he said. "But every time they strike, Africa stands taller. You can kill a man, but you cannot kill the truth he carries." The crowd erupted across the country. From the markets to the universities, chants of "Traoré, Africa" echoed through the streets. Meanwhile, Bessent watched the footage from his London penthouse. The assassination had failed. Instead of breaking him, it had made Traoré immortal. "He's becoming untouchable," one associate warned. Bessent clenched his jaw. "Then we ruin him another way." That night, he made a call, a final desperate move. "If the man can't be destroyed," he said into the phone, "then let's destroy the system he built." The world held its breath. After the failed ambush, the stakes had changed. What began as economic warfare had become a battle for the very idea of sovereignty. Traoré stood before a sea of faces in Revolution Square, the palace lights cutting through dusk like beacons. He did not shout. He spoke, and every word landed like a stone. "We did not begin this fight," he said. "They began it when they decided that our soil was their ledger, our children a line item. They thought silence would be compliance. They were wrong." Behind him, banners fluttered, not the banners of a single party but of a continent reclaiming language and dignity. Hundreds of thousands listened, some in person, millions more through hacked broadcasts and streams that bypassed every attempt to silence them. The Sahel Economic Alliance had become more than an idea. It was now a network of ports, rail lines, vaults, and digital ledgers that moved value outside the old centers of control. In London and New York, Scott Bessent watched collapsing charts and a spreading panic in boardrooms. His private counsel urged a coordinated financial strike, freeze remaining accounts, crash the alliance's liquidity, and leverage allies to isolate Burkina Faso. But the more they squeezed, the more alternative systems, local currencies, community exchange hubs, and gold-backed bonds, proliferated across the region. Global markets quaked not because Africa failed, but because Africa refused to be a passive variable. Traoré's plan had layers. He didn't merely defend, he transformed. Mines were put under worker councils, profits directed to schools and clinics. The stolen convoy was traced through a chain of shell companies and, in an audacious operation, a mixed force of African pilots and maritime units intercepted a cargo route outside Lagos, recovering a portion of the gold and streaming the takedown live. The footage showed crews lowering battered crates into waiting hands, faces wreathed in exhaustion and triumph. The old headlines, instability, reckless leader, flipped into new ones, reparations in motion, communities reclaim wealth. Under the pressure, the Western response fractured. Some governments backed sanctions, others quietly opened talks. International institutions that had long enforced austerity now, for the first time, faced public hearings where African delegations demanded transparency, debt audits, and reparative frameworks. In halls where policies had been dictated for decades, the voices had changed. On a rain-washed morning, Traoré received a call. Not from a foreign minister, but from a mother in a village 2 days' drive away. Her voice trembled with gratitude. "We have water now. My daughter studies. We can breathe." He let silence answer before he replied, "Then we continue." At night, in a small office, Scott Bessent stared at his reflection in the window. The markets he'd thought untouchable had become political instruments he no longer controlled. He had gambled on fear and misread a people's patience for weakness. Power had cost him more than capital, it had cost him legitimacy. Traoré's final address to the continent was not triumphal. It was precise, moral, and forward-looking. He outlined governance pacts, regional courts to adjudicate resource contracts, and educational endowments funded by the recovered wealth. He spoke of vigilance, that sovereignty required not only defense but institutions that prevented new exploitations. "We asked only to stand," he said softly. "We demanded only to be treated as equals. Empires do not merely die in battles, they crumble when the people stop accepting their rules. We didn't bury an empire with a single act. We buried an empire by refusing to be small." The aftermath was messy, imperfect, and alive. Some deals were renegotiated, some men lost fortunes, others found their consciences slowly rearranged by public testimony and courts. The Sahel alliance weathered shocks but grew resilient. Across Africa, new coalitions formed to assert control over fisheries, forests, and data, a green and digital sovereignty complementary to the gold-backed economics that had sparked the fight. In the end, history did not mark a single victor or a single vanquished. It marked a shift, a series of choices by ordinary people and a leader who turned a mocked whisper, "You'll fall like the others," into a mandate for accountability. Empires did not vanish overnight, but the map of power had changed. Traoré walked alone on the palace terrace as dawn opened. He placed his hand on the warm stone and, without ceremony, whispered, "We answered. Now we build." The continent's reply rose like the sun, slow, unstoppable, and for the first time in a long time, truly its own.